Level 1. The BUD/S candidate. Every operator who ever earned a trident started exactly where you're standing right now. Soaked, shaking, staring at a brass bell, and most of them will ring it before this week is over. The bell hangs there the entire time, brass and polished and completely silent, and it is the single most psychologically engineered object you have ever encountered, because nobody has to ring it for you, you have to choose it. And that choice architecture is the actual point of everything happening around you. The surf is cold in a way that stops being a temperature and becomes a physical presence pressing against your chest, and the instructors standing on the beach in dry uniforms watching you shiver are not being cruel. They are running the only test that actually matters at this stage, whether you will choose the cold and the exhaustion over the warmth sitting 3 feet away that the bell represents. You have already survived selection just to be standing here, a physical screening that eliminated most people who ever considered this path before they ever saw the beach. And you understand, distantly, that this filtering has been happening for months before Hell Week even arrives, an accumulating series of smaller tests that quietly removed anyone whose motivation wasn't specific enough to survive the actual event. Hell Week itself operates on a logic that took you weeks to fully understand, 5.5 days of continuous training with minimal sleep. Not because sleep deprivation itself is the skill being tested, but because sleep deprivation strips away every surface-level motivation and leaves only the actual structural reason you're here. Whatever that reason turns out to be under enough pressure. You watch candidates around you ring the bell, one after another, some of them physically stronger than you, and the specific lesson of watching this happen, over and over, is that physical capacity was never the actual variable being measured. A boat crew evolution goes wrong in the surf zone, log carries and boat carries designed specifically to break down team cohesion under maximum physical stress, and you learn in real time that carrying your own exhaustion is a completely different problem than coordinating 6 exhausted people carrying something heavy together, a lesson that has nothing to do with strength and everything to do with a kind of communication you didn't know you needed to develop. There is a night, deep into the week, where your body stops sending you useful information, cold and exhaustion blurring into a single undifferentiated signal that your mind has to consciously override just to keep executing the next 5 minutes of instruction. And something happens in that specific override, repeated enough times across enough hours, that starts to feel less like willpower and more like the discovery of a floor beneath the floor you thought you had. You do not ring the bell. You finish the week in a state that doesn't feel like victory so much as a complete recalibration of what you now understand your actual limits to be, a number that turned out to be much further away than you had ever previously tested. Level 2. The new guy. You arrive at your first platoon with a trident that experienced operators regard, correctly, as unearned in the way that actually matters, because completing training proves you survived a filtering process, not that you're ready to be trusted in the specific, high-consequence ways this platoon operates. You are given the worst jobs without complaint, not as hazing exactly, but as the same continuation of the same filtering logic from BUD/S, now applied to whether you can execute unglamorous, repetitive work with the same precision you'll eventually need for work that matters far more. The experienced operators around you speak a specific shorthand you don't yet fully understand, references to previous deployments, previous mistakes, previous lessons that get compressed into a few words that carry enormous weight for everyone except you, and the specific humility required to sit in that gap, absorbing without yet contributing, is its own kind of training that BUD has never directly prepared you for. You train relentlessly, live fire exercises and close quarters drills repeated until your body executes them without conscious thought, because the entire logic of this rank is building the specific muscle memory that will need to function correctly at a moment when conscious thought is too slow to save anyone. There's an exercise where you make a genuine tactical error, a room-clearing sequence executed slightly out of order, and the correction you receive is immediate, specific, and entirely free of the ego protection that civilian workplaces often extend to new employees. Because the actual stakes here mean that comfortable feedback is a luxury nobody can afford. You absorb the correction without defensiveness, understanding, even this early, that the operators correcting you are extending you a form of respect by taking the correction seriously enough to be blunt about it. Trust builds slowly here, earned through 100 small demonstrations of reliability rather than any single dramatic proof, and you start to notice gradually that senior operators are including you in conversations they once had only among themselves. Level 3. The operator. Your first real deployment arrives with a specific texture that no amount of training fully replicates, because training has an inherent ceiling on consequence that deployment simply does not have. And the first time this distinction becomes viscerally real, rather than theoretical changes, something permanent in how you carry yourself afterward. You execute missions that draw on every year of training compressed into windows of minutes, planning and rehearsal and execution collapsing into a single continuous action, where the specific quality of your preparation either holds under real conditions or reveals a gap nobody caught in training. There's an operation that develops complications nobody fully anticipated, intelligence proving incomplete in a way that forces real-time adaptation from the entire element, and the specific composure required to adjust a plan mid-execution, trusting teammates to adjust alongside you without the conversation needed to fully coordinate it verbally, reveals exactly how much the trust built during your new guy year is actually load-bearing now. The mission concludes, not perfectly but successfully, and the debrief afterward is exacting in a way that has nothing to do with blame and everything to do with the specific professional habit of extracting every possible lesson from an operation regardless of outcome. You start carrying a weight that doesn't fully leave you between deployments, an awareness of consequence that recalibrates how ordinary civilian life feels when you're home, colors and sounds, and the specific mundane safety of normal existence registering differently than they did before this rank. The operators who last long careers in this world are rarely the ones who feel nothing about this weight. They are the ones who develop specific, sustainable ways of carrying it, relationships and habits and support structures that absorb what the job itself cannot avoid generating. Level 4. The Point Man. The element starts trusting you with tactical responsibility beyond your own individual actions, point position on entries, the specific navigational and threat assessment burden of being the first person into an uncertain space, a responsibility that concentrates risk in a way that changes your relationship to every operation you're now part of. You develop a specific situational awareness that operates almost below conscious thought, reading a room's threat profile in the fractional seconds available before the room reads you, a skill built entirely from repetition under conditions where errors carry a cost that training environments cannot fully simulate no matter how realistic they become. You start training junior operators directly now, the new guys arriving with the same unearned tridents you once carried, and the specific patience required to train someone in skills where a mistake could genuinely cost a life draws on a level of care that goes beyond ordinary teaching, a discipline in itself that the senior operators who once trained you clearly carried without you fully appreciating it at the time. There's an operation where your read on a room saves the element from an ambush position nobody else detected in time, a moment that could easily have gone the other way, and the specific weight of having that particular read matter, that much teaches you something about the actual stakes of the position you now hold that no amount of prior deployment fully prepared you for. You start understanding the specific mentorship responsibility this rank actually carries, not just tactical execution but the quiet transmission of judgment, the kind that can't be taught directly but that gets absorbed by junior operators watching how you carry yourself under pressure, the same way you once absorbed it, watching operators senior to you. Level 5, the Chief. The promotion to Chief changes your relationship to the platoon in a way that surprises you, because you expected more direct tactical authority, and instead find yourself carrying an entirely different kind of weight, the actual welfare and readiness of every operator under you, a responsibility that extends into their training, their equipment, their mental state, dimensions of leadership that tactical skill alone never touched. You become the person operators come to with problems that have nothing directly to do with tactics, personal issues, morale issues, the accumulated stress of a career spent absorbing consequence, and the specific capacity required to hold all of this without it compromising the platoon's operational readiness is a discipline you had to develop almost entirely on your own. You start seeing patterns across operators that individual missions never reveal, who's carrying stress in a way that's starting to affect judgment, who needs a different kind of support before a problem becomes a genuine safety issue, and the specific authority to intervene, sometimes pulling someone from an operation despite their own insistence that they're fine, requires a confidence in your own judgment that took years of accumulated experience to actually earn. There's a situation where you make exactly this call, standing down an operator who insists he's ready, and the correctness of that decision, confirmed only in hindsight, teaches you something about the isolated nature of this kind of authority that no promotion ceremony fully prepared you for. You become the actual backbone, connecting the platoon's officers to its operators, translating command intent into execution in a way that respects both the mission requirements and the lived reality of the men actually carrying it out, a translation role that the enlisted leadership structure in this world depends on more heavily than most outsiders ever realize. Level 6, the Master Chief. Your authority now extends across multiple platoons rather than a single one, and the scale of this shift changes the actual texture of your responsibility in ways that surprise you even after years of accumulated leadership experience. You're no longer just managing the welfare and readiness of men you deploy alongside directly. You're shaping training standards, operational readiness, and leadership development across an entire community of operators, many of whom you'll never personally deploy with, but whose capability now depends partly on standards you're responsible for maintaining. You develop a specific eye for identifying which junior chiefs are ready for larger leadership responsibility and which ones need more seasoning, a judgment that draws on the accumulated pattern recognition of an entire career but that now has to be exercised at a remove from the direct operational relationships that once informed this same judgment more intimately. There's a training standard you push to change, based on patterns you've noticed across multiple platoons that no single platoon's leadership would have visibility into on their own, and the institutional resistance you encounter, along with the patient advocacy required to actually shift standards across an entire community, teaches you something about systemic leadership that individual platoon leadership never demanded. You start mentoring chiefs the way you once mentored individual operators, translating decades of accumulated judgment into guidance that respects their own hard-earned experience, while still offering the perspective that only comes from having occupied every rank beneath the one they now hold. Level 7, the Command Master Chief. The final enlisted rank moves you into a position shaping an entire Naval Special Warfare Command's culture, standards, and institutional direction, responsibility that extends far beyond any operators you'll personally know into the entire pipeline that will produce operators for years after your own career concludes. You sit in rooms with officers and civilian leadership whose priorities don't always align cleanly with the lived reality of operators at the platoon level, and you develop a specific advocacy capacity, translating operational truth into language that institutional leadership can actually act on, a skill that draws on every rank you've held but that operates in a register none of them directly prepared you for. There's an institutional decision, a training standard or deployment policy that risks drifting from what operational reality actually requires, and the specific weight of pushing back against leadership with the full authority of your rank, knowing the pushback will not always be welcomed, teaches you something about the loneliness of this level of responsibility that no amount of prior leadership fully anticipated. You shape selection standards that will determine who becomes a SEAL long after you're gone, training pipelines that will produce the operators an entire generation of platoons will depend on, an influence that becomes, in its own way, more consequential than any single operation you personally executed across your entire career. Somewhere on a cold beach tonight, a candidate is standing in the surf, staring at a bell he hasn't rung yet, absorbing a version of the same test you once absorbed, not knowing your name, never likely to know it, but shaped nonetheless by standards and training pipelines that you spent the final years of your career quietly building. The work continues without him knowing you exist, exactly the way it should, because that is the actual relationship this rank has with its own legacy, invisible architecture holding up a structure that will outlast every individual name that ever contributed to building it. So here is the question underneath everything this video just walked you through. Which rank are you standing in right now? Because the Command Master Chief building an entire command's future today did not start there. He started shivering in cold surf, staring at a bell, choosing not to ring it, and he closed that distance one evolution, one deployment, one earned rank at a time.